and welcome back. It's your boy, Dane Johnson 3_16, aka Gravity, the man who has never met a mic he didn't like. I told you not to worry, because I'm back with another serial killer story. That's right. Tonight, the subject is quoted as saying, "It was like their fate to die by my hands, like a car accident or illness. Look over your shoulder. I'm closer than you think." Words spoken by the happy face killer, Keith Hunter Jesperson. Now, little background on the happy face killer, Mr. Jesperson here. Born April 6th, 1955, making our boy an Aries. I said that these stories were kind of gonna intertwine, intermingle a little bit, and I found this one to be fascinating because, kind of like the first case that I talked about, somebody else actually served time for one of the happy face killer murders here. So we're gonna start with that. Now, I'm gonna have to real quickly. Actually, we'll get into that in a little bit. First, let's get in to what made this guy tick. So, again, he's the happy face killer, born April 6th, 1955, making our boy an Aries. He was his number of victims were 8. His characteristics were rape. This is a guy who would pick up prostitutes, pick up anybody, basically, who he didn't have any personal ties to, and, well, one thing led to another, and they became one of his 8+ victims. This is a guy who has confessed to over 156 murders, but the cops were only able to tie him to 8. They think he was exaggerating when it came to his number, which a lot of serial killers do when they're caught. Now, the date of his murders were from 1990 to 1995, with his date of arrest coming on March 30th, 1995. His method of murder was strangulation. His known victims, Tanya Bennett, who was 23 years old, was the first victim. Now, I kind of got mad at myself for not knowing a lot about the victims last time, so I kind of did a little bit more research on this one. The only one I could really find a personality on would be Tanya Bennett, and the reason being because somebody else actually confessed to murdering Tanya Bennett. Now, I'm gonna have to quickly find the names here for you, and as soon as I do, I had them at the top of my head, but of course, I'm stoned and now I can't quite remember it. Okay, so here it is. It's Lavrine Pavlenik. So this is a lady who was, I believe, 53 at the time, and she was in an abusive relationship with this John Sorsnovsky. And anyway, this man was an alcoholic, and this lady's idea to get him out of her life was to basically set him up, to make him look like he was the murderer. Now, the way she did this was actually quite cunning. Now, a lot of you, like me, if you're into true crime, you watch a lot of the Dateline, the true crime kind of shows, and in the early 90s, this lady would watch a lot of those shows, rightfully so. So, in watching those shows, she picked up on a lot of things that police are looking for when it comes to tying someone to a murder. Now, this lady was smart. She was cunning, so she would read all the newspaper clippings, all the articles about this Tanya Bennett who had died, and started building up, coming up with a backstory to pin it on her boyfriend. And she did exactly that. She cut a pair of pants, soaked it in blood, made it look like they were a part of Tanya Bennett's jeans, which in fact the cops looked into and they saw that it wasn't a match at all. The police, when they were investigating, they got a search warrant for the house. And when they were looking around the house of Miss Plevenik, they happened to find a folded piece of paper with Tanya Bennett's name on it. This is something she did as well. She wrote the name, put it down. She knew because in the paper, our Tanya Bennett had died from being stabbed, so she actually had one of her knives missing as well in the kitchen to say, hey, I'm telling you, my boyfriend did this. She looked at the search warrant when the police were there. Most people, when they're served a search warrant, they don't really look into the details of it. She actually read the full search warrant from top to bottom, and in doing that, she saw the probable cause and wanted to know why they were there, and so she memorized that, and she used that to her advantage as well. Now, the police didn't release where the crime scene had actually taken place. There was photos of, the general area, and this was an area that wasn't really traveled, so she actually went hiking up and down the side of the road, and she came across an area where you can tell heavy foot traffic from the side of the road had been going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. So obviously, putting two and two together, she decided, hey, this must be the crime scene. So she went back to the police department and she said, hey, I'll take you to where the crime scene is if you don't believe me. So she took the cops right to the area of where she said, this is where the body would be. And again, how she knew that was kind of like a hunter, I guess, in a way, when you're on a game trail. Like, you could just tell when something's been walked on and when it hasn't been walked on. So she goes back, takes the cops right there. And she even went as far as to implicate herself in these murders, because in her mind, her doing a little bit of time was okay if her abusive boyfriend was going to be in jail for life. She said to herself, I can do a little bit of time. So she said, hey, I strangled this girl. Like, I was there. There was a belt that we put around her neck, and I was the one that actually watched her take her last breath. So the cops pretty well had what they needed. They had the probable cause, and when they went and they arrested Sosnovsky here, it's a weird Russian name, by the way, Sosnovsky. That is one hell of a name. He actually admitted to it too. Like, this guy was an alcoholic who admitted to doing this. He went as far as to say, hey, yeah, no, her body was in the car, all of this. The cops had everything they needed. They had somebody taking them to the crime scene. They had two people confessing to a murder, so they were arrested. They were charged with first-degree murder. And Mr. Sosnovsky was actually a candidate for death row. Like, he could have been put to death, and lucky for him, it was he was sentenced to life, and luckily it wasn't the death penalty for him. And as for Miss Plevenik there, she, as soon as she was in prison, started saying, hey, like, I made a mistake. This was like a coerced confession, and I don't mean anything I'm saying here. Like, you gotta let me out. So, in a weird way, like, I don't want to say, like, you reap what you sow, but it seems to be that way. So, back to Tanya Bennett and the reason why she got herself into this mess to begin with. Tanya had like learning disabilities, bad learning disabilities. She was 23 years old and she was just like such an like outgoing person. Like the first time you met her, apparently she'd hug you, you know, she'd just want to know everything about you. She was super outgoing, and a lot of times you know, like with Jesperson and him not really having that love, not having that connection, he you know, misinterpreted and thought, hey, this is the girl for me. So we're gonna get into exactly what happened to her, but first let's name all the known victims here. So there's Tanya Bennett, who was 23. There was Claudia, whose real name was Cynthia Lynn Rose, who was 32. Lori Ann Pentland, who was 26. Angela Sabriz, who was 21. Julie Ann Winningham, who was 41. And there's also others who are unidentified as of this video going out. And if he was arrested in 95, well, the odds of knowing who they all are, where they all were, is very unlikely. So let's get into the background here. Like many other killers, Jesperson grew up with an alcoholic father who was demoralizing, as well as a violent grandfather. He was one of 5 children born to Leslie and Gladys Jesperson. He was born in Chilliwack, British Columbia. Jesperson was very big for his age and was teased a lot by other children, leading to him becoming a rather lonely young boy. Yeah, I should say, this is a guy who stood, by the time he was fully grown, he was 6'7", 240 pounds. And what makes Hunter Jesperson so interesting is he's born Canadian, but he committed all his crimes in the States, all across different states. So there's probably a few more that are like this in this book, but I thought that was kind of interesting. That's kind of what led me into touching base with this one as well. So, like an outcast within his own family, Jesperson was treated differently than his siblings. After the family moved to Washington, the bullying continued. His brothers were often the ringleaders, nicknaming him Igor or Uli because he was so tall. So this is a regular, hey you guys kind of guy. Sloth, if you will. Now, Jesperson was known to torture and kill animals, which would have indicated serious trouble ahead. He would later state that he enjoyed watching the animals kill each other, and then he got satisfaction from killing them himself. He claimed he would fantasize what it would be like to do the same thing to a person, which often got him into trouble as a youth. He twice was stopped from trying to kill children that had crossed him. So this is a guy who, as early as 10 years old, was attempting to harm other children. Now that should just go to show you all you need to know about this kind of guy. So that's crazy. Like, as young as 5, he's torturing and murdering like cats and dogs. He's insulted a guy's mom, then he kicks him. You know, he attempts to murder 2 kids when he's 10. This guy's shoplifting at 13. He's shooting at neighbors with BB guns. One in the genitals, like one on the ass. He's shooting people with like bows and arrows, and that's not even moving on to the timeline of the murders. Like, that just goes to show you, like, that's just wild. So, one of these kids that he attacked was actually his friend Martin, and like, this is the only guy that actually like hung out with Keith. So Martin would often do things, and he would blame them on Jesperson, and he would get punished for those things that he hadn't done. So he attacks Martin, beating him violently until he's stopped by his own dad. He claimed later that he had fully intended to kill Martin, and about a year later, he's trying to drown another boy while they're swimming. He tried doing it again later at a public pool until a lifeguard stopped him. So this guy, before he's even a teenager, has attempted murder 3 different times on kids. Twice trying to drown kids. That's fucked up, man. Trying to drown someone. Thank God for that lifeguard. So despite these incidences, Jesperson managed to graduate from high school. He got a job driving trucks, and he eventually he married and had 3 kids. 15 years into his marriage, Jesperson and his wife divorced. He had also suffered an injury which prevented him from following his dream of becoming an RCMP, which in Canada is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. By the time Jesperson was 35 years old, he stood 6 feet 7.5 tall and weighed 240 pounds. He returned to truck driving. Before long, he started to act on his fantasies, and the killings began. So, what did I say I wanted to kind of keep track of with like these killings, man, is the jobs that these guys kind of do. Now, I know he ended up becoming a truck driver, and that's probably going to be a main thing too when we go through all these guys and gals and partners. But like the fact that he wanted that job with like that authority that comes with it, RCMP, right? Not the military, but same sort of thing, kind of have that the control that comes with the uniform. There seems to be a lot of those guys out there. So Jesperson's first known victim was Tanya Bennett. We're going to get into the murders now. He met her at the bar on January 23rd, 1990. In Portland, Oregon, he had invited her back to his house, and after participating in sexual activity, they had an argument. Jesperson beat, then strangled her, and he created an alibi by going back out, having some drinks, talking to people. Then he went back and disposed of Bennett's body. So it doesn't say it in the book, but I actually know what happened according to his confession with police. Now, what had happened was he brought Tanya Bennett back to his house. They had started having sex, and she literally looked him in the eyes and said, like, can you just finish? She was just not into this guy at all. Like, she was, like I said, outgoing, promiscuous. There's nothing wrong with that, like, whatsoever. People are allowed to have the sex life they want to have. But, like, this is a guy who thought, hey, I'm going to go get my freak on, and the girl just wanted nothing to do with him. And he snapped. Like, that made him, like, absolutely lose his shit. So we'll get back into the murders here, because there was a substantial gap between the first and the next, and I want to touch on that. So the body of an unidentified woman was found on August 30th, 92 in California. The woman had been raped and then strangled to death, and although his victim had never been identified, Jesperson later stated her name was Claudia, and that was let me flip back here. Oh, so yeah, no, it says Claudia. So that Claudia isn't Cynthia Lynn Rose. Claudia is her own person. So I apologize for that. I thought like that was like her alias or something like that. So the next body, or the next victim, I should say, in September of 92, the body of Cynthia Lynn Rose was found in Turlock. Jesperson claimed she was a prostitute who had entered his truck uninvited, and while he was trying to sleep, she jumped into his truck uninvited while he was sleeping. So that's his story. So the body of another prostitute was found in November of 92, and her name was Lori Ann Petland of Salem. She had allegedly tried to double charge Jesperson for services, and then she threatened to report it to police if he didn't pay. Again, made him snap, and he happened to strangle her. So what I find I just find that crazy, I just find that to be kind of like a made-up story, like, you know, deflecting blame, claiming that somebody jumped into his truck. Like, I guess, yeah, that could happen, but you're at a truck stop. Like, chances are, I don't know. I guess when you're a serial killer, it's a little different, but I'd probably lock my doors, you know, so nobody's coming in and out of my shit. Those truck stops are notorious for crimes. Back then, too, especially, like, not too many cameras out, right? So, that's pretty wild. We're going to get back here in June of 93, more than 6 months later. The body of another unidentified woman was found, again in California, and according to Jesperson, her name was either Cindy or Carla. And in September of 94, another body of an unidentified woman was found in Florida, and Jesperson later claimed that her name had been Suzanne. Jesperson was asked by Angela Subbreeze in January of 95 for a ride to Indiana from Spokane, Washington. He agreed, and about a week into their journey, she started to nag Jesperson, telling him to hurry. She wanted to go see her boyfriend. So instead, Jesperson decided to rape and strangle her. Afterwards, oh my god, this is fucking wild. Afterwards, Jesperson tied her to the undercarriage of his truck face down and dragged her down the road to remove her face and destroy any fingerprints. Now that goes beyond. Like, I don't even know how the hell you would do that to someone. Like, how you could mentally do that to someone, but how you could actually physically chain someone or tie someone to the bottom of your truck. And, like, that's crazy. So the only personal murder was his girlfriend, Julie Ann Winningham. Jesperson got into it, or hang on here, got it into his head that she only wanted him for his money, so on March 10th, 95, he strangled her to death. This was the murder that alerted police to Jesperson because Winningham had been in a relationship with her. Oh, because they'd been in a relationship before her death. See, so they say that, like, this is kind of what, like, rang him in, and yeah, they talked to him, the police talked to him. They didn't have anything on him, like, whatsoever. So this is a guy who actually could have got away with that murder, and he later went back and confessed. So this book is kind of like trying to make the story a little sexier, but everything that I've looked up, I've checked multiple sources. There's a good show on Netflix as well. It's called Catching Killers. The Happy Face Killer happens to be on there. And also on YouTube, there's a psychologist by the name of Dr. Grande who analyzes everybody and kind of gives, like, his diagnosis as to like what happened and everything according to the research, again, that I've done. This is a guy who would have got away with it. He would have definitely got away with that first murder. So we're going to get into that as well as to in a little bit. First, we'll get into the timeline on the known murders, but when I get into, like, how he confessed about that first one, a little bit of foreshadowing, it's just wild. The only reason why he got, like, caught and the cops actually believed him is somewhat wild. So the timeline of the murders, like I said, we got January 23rd, 1990, and that's Tanya Bennett, who was 23. August 30th, 92, Claudia, in brackets, Jane Doe. September of 92, Cynthia Lynn Rose. She was 32. November of 92, Lori Ann Petland, who is 26. In June of 93, Carla or Cindy, in brackets, Jane Doe. September of 94, Suzanne, in brackets, Jane Doe. January of 95, Angela Subbreeze, who is 21. And in March 10th of 95, Julie Ann Winningham, who is 41 and also the girlfriend at the time of Keith Hunter Jesperson. So we'll get in to the arrest and trial here. Jefferson was brought in for questioning after the death of his girlfriend, but he wouldn't answer any of the questions, and authorities had no grounds to formally arrest him for the murder. He was released without being charged. Over the next several days, Jefferson felt certain he was going to be arrested in just a matter of time. So, what's crazy, I'm just doing a quick scan here and I don't see it in the book, so I'm going to pause a little bit and talk about something else that I found in my research. So he actually went home that day and tried to kill himself. He grabbed as many pills as he could find. And he tried to overdose. It didn't happen. He woke up the next day, and then actually, like, right when he woke up and he was coherent enough, he did the exact same thing. He grabbed doubled the dose of the pills this time, basically took whatever he had left and tried to kill himself, like, back-to-back times on back-to-back days, and obviously was unsuccessful. And like, one night he got really drunk, got hammered, and he called and talked to his brother, basically admitted everything, and his brother told him, hey, like, you need to go turn yourself in. So it's interesting, like, you know, he might have eventually been arrested for the one murder, but this is a guy who would have definitely got away with all those other ones. So it's just interesting to me when you hear about the serial killer who kind of, like, confesses to it, like, comes in and confesses to it. And we'll get into other ones that did, but most of the time when it comes to serial killers, again, like, you don't catch them, you don't know who they are, and they're going to be your neighbor, they're going to be the guy dropping off your grocery order, your cab driver, you know, your landscaper. It could literally be anybody. It's not the freaks that you think it is, it's the normal people, because the freaks get caught right away, man. Freaks don't have that control, they don't have that sort of planning that goes into it, and it's just, it amazes me the more I get into this, the more, again, similarities I see, and even the differences, like, in the way people do it. It's just so personal, or unpersonal, or not personal, I should say. So Jefferson decided to turn himself into police with the hope that they would help when it came to the sentencing. He was arrested on March 30th, 95. During his interviews, Jefferson began to talk about the details of not only Winningham's murder, but also several others he had claimed to have committed. Later, he changed his story and said he was innocent. In a letter he had written to his brother, however, he admitted killing 8 people. So, you know, admitting to the killings and then realizing that it's not one of those, oh, well, thanks for coming in, man, and telling us you committed 8 murders, and because you did that, we're just going to let you go home and keep an eye on you. It amazes me that a lot of those, a lot of killers think that. They think, like, hey, man, like, I've been caught, I really got to stay here now for the rest of my life. It's kind of goes back to being a kid, and, like, when you're grounded, you know, you just ask your mom 7 or 8 times if you could go outside, and eventually they say yeah. So, despite eventually claiming to have killed around 160 women, investigators were only able to link him to 8. A number of trials commenced. The murders had been committed in several states, so each case was filed in, you know, the location of where the murder was. It's another thing that a lot of these serial killers do, is they kill across different state lines, and unless you're leaving, like, a trademark, like, hey, I killed this person, cops, they're not going to know. And that's why a lot of these guys get away with it. You're not just going to call up, you know, the next county and be like, hey, like, someone did this here too. Like, for some reason, cops aren't like that. They don't like working together. It's weird. So just before Jefferson was about to go on trial for the murder of Winningham, he had pleaded guilty in October of 95, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was then transferred to Oregon, and on November 2nd, 95, he entered no contest plea for the murder of Tanya Bennett. Again, he was sentenced to life, this time with a minimum period of 35 years before he could apply for parole. While in prison in Oregon, a case was being put together for the murder of Lori Ann Pentland. Once investigators discovered Jesperson was the happy face killer, they were able to link him to the death of Pentland because letters had been written by Jesperson after the murder of Pentland claiming responsibility for the killing, and they were signed the happy face killer. He was convicted of that murder as well and sentenced to life again, with a minimum of a 30-year period. So, an extradition order was secured by the state of Wyoming to put Jesperson on trial for the murder of Angela Subbreeze. Jesperson frustrated the authorities by threatening to change his story about where he had actually killed her. If she hadn't been murdered in Wyoming, the costly court process would be invalid. That's crazy. Eventually, a deal was made where he pleaded guilty to the murder with the agreement the prosecutors in Lane County would not seek the death penalty. Okay, so that's kind of smart of him. Yeah, that's kind of smart. So this is a guy who knew that he would probably be convicted to death in that state, and he said, hey, the only way I'm going to cooperate with you is if death isn't even, like, it can't be on the table. I'll serve life, but you ain't killing me. That's interesting. On June 3rd, 1998, Jesperson received a life sentence for the murder of Subbreeze, and it is still possible for other charges and trials to take place regarding the many other murders he has yet to be tried for. So, again, very interesting. So we're going to get into the outcome because I want to quickly talk about something else too, which I find crazy. So one important outcome of the Jesperson being convicted of the murder of Tanya Bennett was the release of the two people who had previously been convicted of the crime. Laverine Pavlinik was tired of being in a long-lasting abusive relationship, which I said, with John Sosnovsky. Thinking it would be a good way to get rid of him, she went to detectives and claimed Sosnovsky had forced her to help him murder and rape Tanya Bennett. The tactic backfired on Pavlinik when she and Sosnovsky were charged and convicted in February of 91 of the murder. And in an effort to avoid being found guilty and receiving the death penalty, Sosnovsky pled guilty and he was sentenced to life. And Pavlinik received 10 years. Although she was quick to admit she had made the whole story up, nobody paid any attention to her. 4 years later, on November 27th, 95, both Pavlinik and Sosnovsky were released after Jesperson and his attorney provided his confession. To prove they were innocent, Jesperson informed the detectives on where to find Bennett's purse. Information only the killer would know. See, now they find that all hunky-dory, the way they, like, put that in the story like that, but the police weren't going to release Pavlinik and Sosnovsky because they had a signed confession by them, and they wanted actual evidence. So when Jesperson was like, oh yeah, no, like, her purse is somewhere over there, man, you know how much time had went by and, like, what could have happened? They didn't even find her purse. Like, I love that they say that they found her purse. They found one ID card. Everything else was gone. There were guys on their hands and knees scraping and raking and turning over land and throwing over logs, and they happened to find an ID in the general area of where the happy face killer said he had thrown her purse. So, man, talk about like crazy fate and like what a twist that was. Can you imagine someone just walking by nonchalantly or having a picnic and seeing an ID and grabbing it, or an animal grabbing it, a crow seeing the reflection of an ID and just grabbing it, any other bird, any other animal taking it, making a nest or something out of it, and those two people would still be in prison, all because someone wanted to get out of an abusive relationship and didn't know or didn't have the help to get out of it any other way. That's dangerous, man. That's like some mental warfare mind games that are beyond me. And I just found that to be absolutely crazy and just second level wild when it came to this case. I like cases that like intermingle like just numerous things that like don't make sense, but in the end it makes sense, because you got to do your research, you got to look into it. And as I sit here with a happy face, I can say that, you know, I might have googled a few things. But anyway, guys, that's the happy face killer. That's Keith Hunter Jesperson. A live story by your boy Dane Johnson 3_16, aka Gravity, the man who has never met a mic he didn't like. And again, don't worry, because tomorrow I'll be back with another serial killer story. From the Big Book of Serial Killers, an encyclopedia of serial killers, 150 serial killer files of the world's worst murderers, written by Jack Rosewood and co-authored by Rebecca Lowe. I thank you for tuning in. Have a great night.